Now, politicians are always excited by visionary schemes. The words of Alistair Darling, who as Labour Chancellor agreed to plans to build a new high-speed rail link from London to the Midlands and then the north of England. But that was then. The planned cost was 30 billion. This is now, and the cost has spiralled to 50 billion, with some claiming 70 billion is more realistic. Mr Darling says the facts have changed and he is now against the scheme. So is this the beginning of the end of cross-party support for one of the biggest capital projects of the next decade? The Shadow Transport Secretary Maria Eagle will give her view in a moment. First, Jim Reid reports.
Screaming across the country at hundreds of miles an hour, but for the moment at least, not our country. Bullet trains, the TGV, even magnetic levitation have all been used for years in other parts of the world. But outside a tiny section of the southeast, high-speed rail in the UK is still little more than a computer animation. Today, Alistair Darling became the latest political voice to come out strongly against plans for the high-speed 2 line linking Leeds and Manchester with Birmingham and London. The former Chancellor and Transport Minister said, "My fear is, if you build this visionary project, then you will have a nightmare on the rest of the network. That's why I question whether or not you want to put all your eggs in this one basket." That view will be well received in many towns along the HS2 route. Opponents say they agree with Alistair Darling when he claims public money would be far better spent upgrading existing infrastructure like the East Coast Main Line and rail links to East Anglia and between cities outside of London. This comes after Mr Darling's new Labour colleague Peter Mandelson warned the project could be an expensive mistake. The Mayor of London has called it a gimmick he then compared to the Millennium Dome. And the head of the business lobby group, the CBI, has also now called for a review. If it does go ahead, the first phase of HS2 should see high-speed trains running between Birmingham and London by 2026, with 2 further spurs north to Manchester and Leeds by 2033. A passenger from Birmingham would cross the Chilterns at 225 miles an hour and come into North London here at a redeveloped Euston station. But to go any further on high-speed rail, they would have to get out, then walk for a good 10 minutes, or jump on the tube to get to here at St Pancras station, where the Eurostar service takes you down to the Channel Tunnel, so there could be no direct link from Manchester or Leeds to Paris or Brussels. Critics say any national high-speed network needs to be more joined up. But it's the rising costs to the taxpayer which has really scared off the likes of Darling and Mandelson. From a starting point of £33 billion when the project was first announced, the government's own cost estimate has now risen to £43 billion. Reports this week claim civil servants in the Treasury are now using a figure of £73 billion when VAT and inflation are added. The IEA, a free market think tank, puts the true cost at £80 billion. Senior Labour figures today reaffirmed their backing for the project, but made clear it is now conditional on costs being kept in check.
We've consistently supported proposals for a new north-south rail link, but it's got to be value for money. And the government's handling of this has been chaotic. The costs seem to be going up by billions of pounds month by month by month. We want this to work, but there is no blank cheque from Labour.
The shift in that position comes as Labour MPs in cities along the HS2 route have also started questioning the benefits to local business. But supporters of this project, and there are many in Parliament, say the economic case for HS2 is still very clear. This new Javelin train is the first domestic high-speed service in the country, cutting the journey time from London down to the south coast from around 90 minutes to less than an hour. The Conservative MP, who represents the town at the end of the UK's only existing high-speed line, says the long-term benefits might not show up on a spreadsheet.
I think you couldn't really talk about economic regeneration in a town like Folkestone without talking about high-speed rail. And the benefit of high-speed rail is far greater than the sales of tickets that the rail company might make. It is a driver for investment and economic growth, and it is a vital part of our future success here.
The government said tonight it is still committed to High Speed 2 and the Labour front bench is still backing the project. But if costs rise any further this autumn when an updated business case is published, then that rare cross-party unity may well crumble.
Jim Reid reporting. I'm joined now by Labour's Shadow Transport Secretary, Maria Eagle. How much would costs have to go up before you said it's just not worth it?
Well, I don't think it's an issue of trying to second-guess that kind of thing. The reality is, we've looked at this. I had it in our own transport policy review, put it in there. The reason why we're in support of this new North-South line is because we have to make sure that there's sufficient capacity in our railways.
But it's conditionally supported by Labour. Conditionally supported. Ed Balls made that absolutely clear. No blank check.
Well,
so where does the blank check run out?
Ed Balls is doing his job as Shadow Chancellor, as he would be doing if he were Chancellor.
But he's looking at the money, isn't he?
Saying that there's no blank... His job is to look at the money.
Where do the conditions come in? I mean, how much money is too much to spend on one railway line?
Well, look, we need to solve the capacity problems that are inherent in our railway at the moment.
But the capacity problems all over the place. The capacity problems in the southeast.
No, the capacity problems on the West Coast Main Line arise out of the fact that we're trying to do three things on that line: run fast north-south intercity services, commuter services and freight. We've had such big increases over the last 20, 30 years in the use on our railways that there's simply not going to be space to do all of those things and keep growing our economy and keep making sure our railways work. We have to solve that problem. And one thing that opponents don't come up with when they say they're in favour of cancelling this solution to that problem is what they would do to solve those capacity
There are
issues.
some who doubt some of those capacity figures, but the Department of Transport's entire capital budget is £9 billion a year. Now, are you saying that £70 billion a year spent on one railway, £70 billion spent overall on one railway line wouldn't suck money from other projects? Because that's exactly what Alistair Darling is saying.
Well, I think he's wrong about that. There has been a budget. Department for Transport has budgets now through from 2015 to 2021. And it's quite clear if you look at those budgets that not only will our investment in the railway lines, things like the East Coast, electrification, new railway, rolling stock, not only will that be increasing every year during that period, but there will also be money for high-speed rail and new North-South railway lines.
Where's the point where you say too much?
I am not concerned at present that there isn't money through the whole of the next Parliament for both improving our railways, plans that there are already in place to do that.
But Ed Balls appears to be concerned, and according to the front page of the Times, so does Ed Miliband. They're saying it's not unconditional, and it may not even be in Labour's next manifesto.
No project is ever completely unconditional, is it? But what we've been very clear about, and I'm very clear about, so is Ed Miliband, is that we're in favour of this because it's the only solution that's been put forward so far to solve the real issue. But not at any price. And I'm just asking,
what's the price?
Well,
I mean, are you out of the loop on this?
No, of course I'm not out of the loop on this. I mean, I conducted our policy review that recommitted us to it. I didn't start out in this job with one view or another about this. I've looked at it from a blank sheet of paper at what we need in this country to make sure that the next Transport Secretary and the one after that isn't managing the decline of our railways.
But do you
we need to deal with capacity.
But do you understand why...
Those people who object to this need to actually say what their alternative plan to deal with the capacity issues on our railway is.
But then you need to say how much is too much to spend on this, because the history of British governments of whatever stripe with major capital projects from the Jubilee Line extension to the Millennium Dome has been that whatever you say it's going to cost, it costs a lot more.
Look, we now have a budget. It has included in it contingency, over £16 billion of contingency, £2 billion of which is VAT, which ought to be reclaimable. Both Patrick McLaughlin and I say very clearly, there is the budget. It needs to be built within that budget on time. There's no reason why we can't do that as a nation. We do with big infrastructure projects, and that's what both he and I would expect to happen. Now, this is a project that's going to be going over Parliament, and so it does need cross-party consensus. It still has that. Of course, Ed Miliband and Ed Balls are completely right to say there's no blank cheque. There never is a blank cheque for anything. But what I say is, in order to prevent the next Transport Secretary and the next government from presiding over the managed decline of our railways, we have to solve this capacity problem. those opponents, including Alistair Darling, who's come out with his views today, need to say, if not this, what are we going to do to solve that problem? They never answer that question.
OK, we'll leave it there. Maria, go. Thank you very much. Well, the Times front page has now Labour threatens to derail HS2 over cost support waivers, as Ball says, no blank cheque.